Run, river, run, run through the hills. Run, river, run to the sea. Run, river, run to your place beneath the sun. Run, river, run over me.
Hi, this is Jan Lewis. Welcome to me, my guest today. I have the author James Redfearn, and he is an author. He's from Rentham, and he wrote the book. This is the second one, An Appointed Time. This is the one I've read. And his first one was The Rising of Roxbury Crossing, and he's going to tell you all about these. Welcome.
Thank you.
There you go. Now, when you spoke, I think it was at the State Police Barracks in Grafton. Is that how I heard about you?
The museum, yes.
The museum, yeah.
Right.
I remember when it used to be the barracks.
That's
when
right.
The guys used to go there.
Yeah, I was stationed there.
This story, An Appointed Time, it's a novel, but you know what? It seems so real. Was it based on a lot of real things?
Oh, yeah. Both my books, I've seemed like I've fallen into this niche of writing historical fiction.
Yeah.
And it's usually the history that attracts me to the writing and the story in the first place,
Now tell us about it. You have to give away the ending, but in the late 1950s, Frank, go ahead. Tell them what it was all about.
Well, in the exactly. In the late 1950s, there were two brothers, William and John Coyle, who incidentally had been in the Air Force. They were in the service.
Oh, so John Coyle was for real.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Some of the main characters in my stories, I'll use their actual names, but they're usually surrounded with a lot of fictional characters also.
Yeah.
And I give a disclaimer in both books that while there are historical events related to this story, that the reader should consider it all as fiction and figments of my imagination.
All right, so he makes a life-changing decision.
Okay, so you're talking about Frank Mahan.
Yeah.
Yes, in the story, Frank Mahan he makes a life-changing decision, and he becomes a state police officer. And when the story opens up, he is a recruit, and he's now stationed at the Grafton Barracks, right down the street here. And what's interesting about Frank is that as one of his senior officer, his coach, so to speak, calls him and describes him as a tabula rasa, a blank slate, that he's not a veteran. And again, this story takes place in the late 1950s. Most of these guys in the barracks were veterans of either World War II or the Korean conflict. And so I thought, because of when I did the research on the history and whatnot, I just thought it'd be interesting. It goes along with what I believe is the theme of the story, and that is a whole theme of violence and how it affects the people who are surrounded by it or participating in it in some way. And so I dropped him as I said, this blank slate that hasn't been exposed to this. He was never in the service, and he doesn't have any military or police background, and now he is a new recruit in Grafton Barracks, and we see these events, these historical events, through his eyes, so to speak. And it's not just these particular historical events, but it's the history of the time, which is the late 1950s.
Yeah.
So
now, I remember, when did the Grafton Barracks officially close down as the barracks?
I think, I'm guessing at this a little bit. I want to say the 90s, maybe, the 1990s. Yeah. I'm not sure the exact date, but I think it was in the 1990s, or maybe the early 2000s.
Now, our main character, he had a fateful meeting with fugitive, the real guy, John Coyle, in the swamps and cranberry bogs of Middleborough. Right. Tell us about. I didn't know about this till I saw this book. What was that all about?
So, the two brothers were in the service. They were in the Air Force, of all things, and the older brother, John, was involved in a motorcycle accident. He was stationed in Patrick Air Force Base in Florida, and as a result of the accident, he ended up obtaining a medical discharge, and so he leaves the Air Force. He comes up to the Cape Cod area and ends up sharing an apartment with his younger brother, who is currently an airman at Otis Air Force Base. They have kind of a rough background growing up. They grow up somewhat poor in Philadelphia, and their mother was sick through a lot of their lives. And about the time they were teenagers, she passes, she dies. What's interesting is they were not put in the care of anyone in the family, and she had designated a woman who was going to take care of them, and she was a good friend of theirs, of the mother, and she ends up a very good, surrogate mother for them. Mm-hmm. Their father, unfortunately, was a very bad alcoholic, and he died when they were teenagers of cirrhosis of the liver. So the older brother, John, quits high school after his second year. The younger brother does graduate. And it's around this time that Mrs. Higgins tells them that really the best thing they could do for themselves is enter the service. Yeah. So they both enter the Air Force. And it's while they're in the Air Force that John, for some unknown reason, and maybe it's a little bit of a trend of the 50s also at that time, starts to feel that he really got a bad hand in life and a bad deal, and that the only way that they're ever going to get their piece of the pie, so to speak, is to become criminals. And he actually thinks that he's going to become the next Frank. They are going to become the next Frank and Jesse James, or he's going to be a John Dillinger character. What's interesting is that in the 1950s, there is a little bit of this going on. After a lot of wars, it seems like people, especially for soldiers, will kind of second guess the whole thing and say, was this really necessary and so forth. Mm-hmm. So you'll see that at this time there's the advent of the motorcycle gangs and whatnot, and a lot of those members are veterans. Plus, there's that whole rise of juvenile delinquency, and that's actually how John Coyle described himself, as I'm a juvenile delinquent, and I'm going to take what's mine now.
Well, how old was he then?
John he's 23. He actually, during the manhunt, turns 24. His brother is 2 years younger than him.
Okay. Were you involved in any way in real life with this?
No. I came on the job in 1971, and this took place in 1959. But I've interviewed fellas that were involved with this. Yeah. And actually, it's a coincidence what happened on my drive up here to the studio. I got called by one of the fellas that I interviewed about something that was going on tomorrow, and asking me if I would be interested in going. And he's a great guy. But they're older now. These guys are in their 80s now.
Really?
Yeah.
But by today's standards, that's not that old anymore.
Oh, no, it's not.
Oh, my God, no. 100 years old.
Yeah.
I watch the obituaries. I watch it. My grandfather used to do that, and that's how, growing up, I heard about it.
Yeah.
So I do it. But I do it to see what was it? Grandpa used to say, if I'm not there in the obituaries, I can go on another day.
Yeah.
He was my the Scottish grandpa. Yeah. Now, all right, so continuing with John Coyle. So about in his 24, they were after him. They got him, too.
Yes.
They got him.
What they did is they decided they were going to start this criminal career, and they robbed a First National store in Buzzards Bay on the Cape. And if I'm sure your listeners will remember that at the time, the First National, I think, was really the first chain large grocery store, a one-stop shopping grocery store in the country, and so it did garner a lot of revenue, from the number of people who would come in and so forth. So he saw this, and he decided this would be a good score for them. So they robbed the store, and unfortunately, every time they did a robbery, somebody, or at least a firearm was used, and somebody gets shot. Yep. In this case, two people are shot. The manager of the store and one of the clerks. A little side note: the fellow that called me on my way over here, who was involved with their capture. Yeah. The manager of the store that was shot was his father-in-law.
Oh my God!
And so it does have kind of a connection. But at any rate, they leave, and he soon finds out that the police picked up a trail, and so they flee and they leave. They leave the Cape Cod area, and they go up to Maine, and then from Maine they travel back to Philadelphia, where they came from. Yeah. While they're in Philadelphia, they continue their criminal venture, and they rob a number of stores and bar rooms and so forth. And then one morning, the younger brother is out stealing milk. This is in the days when the milkman would deliver the milk and leave it on the porches and whatnot. And he was out early one morning stealing milk, and he's confronted by a patrolman, and he kills a patrolman. they flee from Philadelphia, and now they steal a car and they kidnap the owner of the car and they bring him back to Massachusetts. And the reason why they come back to Massachusetts and the reason why they come back to the Middleborough Woods is when they were living in this area, they spent a lot of their off time both hiking and hunting in the woods in the Middleborough area, which is close to the area is now called the Rocky Gutter Preserve. And they spent a lot of time in that area. So they spent 9 days in the woods with their hostage. And they would venture out each day, and they were making surveillances of places where they were thinking of robbing. And they also, interestingly enough, spent time at the Mouse Standish State Forest in Long Pond. And they would go and spend several hours there, wading in the water and sitting and just watching ordinary families.
Where is that now? I've heard of Long Pond.
It's in Plymouth.
Okay.
And they would spend time there, just watching people, and it was kind of, again, almost like they were, reflecting on their own lives, and that's beyond this story of the manhunt and who these guys were. That's kind of what the themes of the story is.
Yeah.
This whole thing is a character study of John Coyle and of this fictitious trooper, and it considers the themes of like predestination, for example, that things that happen today or happen to you in your life were predestined a long, long, long time ago before you were born. It's kind of a play on the philosophy of St. Augustine and also the book of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament. So anyways, they stay in the woods for the 10th day. They come out of the woods. They rob a liquor store. This time they are confronted by the police. There's an initial shootout. Then they flee into the woods where they're very comfortable. And they were able to hold off a posse, basically, of 400 police officers for 3 days because they knew the woods better than the police. And it wasn't until, to be quite honest, it was John's arrogance that caused their demise and their downfall. So.
Well, we're talking with James Redfearn, and he is the author of An Appointed Time. He's also the author of The Rising at Roxbury Crossing. We're going to talk about that, too. James, how can they get your book?
Okay, there's several ways. They can go on Amazon and on Barnes & Noble and iTunes and Kobo in Canada. They can also get it at, a lot of times the local bookstore will have it. If they don't have it, they can order it. It is actually in four bookstores in the Boston area, some of the larger bookstores in there. But even a smaller bookstore can order it through the Ingram system.
Now, you're also available to give presentations about this, too. How can they reach you?
I am, yeah. If anyone is interested in having me come and speak about the writing process, which I'm doing now, or both books, they can contact me through my website, www.jamesredfearn.com. And if they just query my name on Google, it'll come up.
And it's spelled Redfearn, not
Right.
Fern.
Right.
Now, this is great. Now, especially if you live in this area, about the Grafton Barracks, before we talk about the other book, there was a couple parts in this that I just chuckled out loud. Our main hero, Frank, is standing there, I think, with another officer, and they're looking down at the city of Worcester, right? And he said, all of these old hospitals seem to be built on hills,
Right.
and that is so true.
Yeah.
Now, UMass isn't. The new word, like St. V's, they're more than plopped in the center of the city.
Right.
But some of them, some of them used to. I know St. V's was, right? That was an old hospital.
I actually got that piece of history from a doctor.
I'll bet. Yeah.
My last career, I spent a couple of years working with the CEO of the Caritas Christi Healthcare
Caritas,
System.
yeah.
And he was the one who told me that, because we used to go to a lot of the hospitals in the Boston area that were way up on hills,
Yeah.
and he said that's why they built them. So I put that into my story.
Other thing that got me was that when Frank is a new recruit, he's over at the state trooper barracks, and it's chow time. The other guys that are sitting there don't budge to make move for him. He
Right.
has to find a place
Right.
to sit. Is that the way the guys act?
Early on, there was a whole process of bringing people in, our new troopers slowly into the confidence of the older officers and stuff.
Well, I'm reading it and I'm thinking,
Yeah.
where's this guy going to sit?
Yeah.
Do you
Well,
just-
you notice also he also washed cruisers. And
Yeah.
he cleaned their boots, and there was a whole
Hierarchy there.
Hierarchy. So, yes.
Did you go through this yourself?
I did a little bit, yes. And when we were in the academy, that was some of the traditions that we would get.
James is a former Massachusetts state trooper, investigator for a Boston law firm, and industrial photographer. He earned a graduate degree in literature and creative writing at Harvard University, and he was raised in the Mission Hill neighborhood of Boston. That was quite a place to be raised.
Yeah.
What was that? What was that like? What was that? Primarily Irish, or what was
It was
that?
primarily Irish at Mission Hill. I came from the projects, so we were called the cave dwellers.
Oh, God.
As compared to the folks up on the hill, and but it was a great place to grow up. A very, very strong Irish Catholic neighborhood, and it was during this period of the 1950s. So, it was a little bit of rough and tumble, relationship between people in the Mission Hill area, but they were all great people.
What made you decide to go into law enforcement?
Well, it's funny. Similar to Frank in the story, I was actually an industrial commercial photographer, and
That's a leap. Let me tell you.
yeah.
Yeah, my husband's a photographer, and to make a leap from that into law enforcement.
Well, what happened was a lot of the companies I worked for at the time, including Sylvania Electric, relied on federal contracts. And around that time, the federal money started to dry up, and the first thing the companies would do is they'd lay off people. And so I was laid off a couple of times within a couple of years. And at the time, I was married. I had 3 children at the time, and we had a home. And so I was looking for something a little more secure. And my wife's cousin had just graduated, and he was in the class just before I went in. And he said, "Why don't you take the exam?" And
Where was that now? Boston?
well, I took the exam down in, I think it was New Bedford, but I went through the academy in Framingham.
Oh, that's not far from here.
Yeah,
Oh.
right.
What did you think? I mean, it had to be such a cultural shift to do going from a photographer now to law enforcement.
Yeah, but in some ways, I found things similar. In other words, in photography, oftentimes you're looking for the best picture. You're looking, it's a learning process. And I learned to, I think, love the state police life because, first of all, of its traditions, its great traditions, but also because there was so much to learn in that business. When a trooper goes through the academy, I always describe it as it's like going through a semester in college and boot camp at the same time.
Oh.
Military boot
It was
camp.
rough enough in college, let alone go through boot camp.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So it was a great experience. And I met some of the best people in the world when I was on the state.
Were you in the
police.
service at all?
I wasn't. So similar to Frank, some of my experiences come out in Frank,
Now, the first book that you have published was The Rising at Roxbury Crossing. What was that about?
That's about the Boston police strike of 1919.
I don't remember that. Hearing about.
No, it's funny. I grew up in the city, and how that story came about, and I was actually writing short stories when I decided to write my first novel, and that was as a result of a conversation I had with my father-in-law. We were just having a cup of coffee on his back porch one day, and we were talking, and he was talking about his life, and it seemed like he was a little disappointed that he never really knew his own father because his father died when he was 3 years of age.
Oh.
And so I said, well, tell me what you know about him, Bill. And I'm thinking, maybe I can find something out for him. Because I've done a lot of research, and I thought, maybe I can find something about his father that he doesn't know. And so he told me one of the things he mentioned was, well, I think he was a Boston police officer. And I said, all right. So that led me to a meeting with the archivist from the Boston Police. And what I learned from talking to her was, yeah, he was a police officer. But what was really interesting was that he was a Boston police officer during a critical period in the department's history, because he was one of 1,100 officers who in 1919 walked off the job over working conditions. It was a labor issue. And they were subsequently all fired. And by the way, there was only about 1,100 patrolmen at the time.
They were fired for walking.
They were all fired, and they could never return to the department. And what they ended up doing was filling their positions with World War I veterans.
Oh, wow.
So I thought, I said, this is an interesting story, and maybe I can write a story following one of these guys. The most interesting thing about that whole novel, and what really I became excited about, was that through my research I learned that this wasn't just a labor issue, that this was actually a political part of a political struggle that was occurring in Boston at the time between the older traditional English families, otherwise known as the Brahmins, and the newly arrived Irish community and citizens. And it was what the English families were very concerned about was that the Irish basically were going to take over the city, because what they were seeing was an Irish police force, an Irish fire department, and now an Irish mayor.
Yeah.
And they were really concerned about that. So there were changes in the laws and whatnot to hopefully prevent this. And so when these guys went on strike, we see a lot of that fear and whatnot come up through the story, and then plus the fact that at the same time there was the Irish Anglo-Irish War of Independence going on in Ireland, otherwise known as the Irish Rebellion. And what I learned was that the communities in Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, New York, the Irish communities were supporting the rebels in Ireland.
Really?
Yes, and that one of the key players in the Irish Rebellion, a fellow by the name of Eamon de Valera, actually escaped from an English prison and came to Boston.
What was his last name?
De Valera.
That doesn't sound Irish.
No, it's actually I think he was Spanish or Cuban.
Or Portuguese?
No, he's Cuban or Spanish. I'd have to go back and look at my notes.
Yeah.
But his mother was Irish, and she actually came. She had him in Ireland. Came to New York where they were living, and when his father died, she moved back to Ireland, and he ended up becoming, fully involved with the Irish Rebellion and whatnot.
James, when you were at Harvard, what was your major?
I majored in literature and creative writing.
So all you did, from photography to police work, the state police, you ended up what you studied in college.
Yeah.
Did you always know that you were going to write, do you think?
I always had an interest in it. It's funny, since I've started writing and I've gone public with this, I've had some fellas come up to me that I was on the job with tell me, I used to love to read your reports. It was like reading a novel. I said, really? Yeah, I got a big kick. Yeah, I mean, I was one of the cops that didn't mind writing a report because I would write it like a novel,
We're talking with James Redfearn, and he is the author of The Rising at Roxbury Crossing and An Appointed Time. Now, if you want to hear about from a, let's say from a recruit's aspect of the Grafton State Police Barracks, terrific story. I mean, it gets you right from the beginning. And I haven't read this one, but The Rising, which he's just been talking about at Roxbury Crossing. How, again, can they get your books?
Again, if they go up online, if they get them online, you can get them through Amazon or a lot of the online retailers. You can get it. You can also get it actually through my website. If you go through my website and use PayPal, you can order it directly from me. I will sign it, autograph it, and send it right out to you. Or if you go to local bookstores, some of them have it, some of them may not have it, but they can order it, so you can get it that way.
Now, also, don't forget, you up-to-nights out there that are watching, you can go right downstairs to our library, and you can borrow a copy of his book, which is another great way to get the word out about it. Where have you been speaking and giving presentations?
I've been into the Boston Public Libraries. I've been in restaurants. I've done a lot of local groups like Lions clubs and the Rotary clubs. I've done a lot of those. On my first book, I did a lot because it has that Irish connection.
Yeah.
I spoke at the New England Irish Cultural Center several times at their festivals. And I also spoke in Milwaukee. Believe it or not, Milwaukee is the largest Irish cultural festival in the country. On a weekend, they'll have 200,000 people attend it.
How did these people hear about you, like at the the clubs that you've been speaking, Rotary and things. How did they find out?
Part of it's word of mouth. Part of it is, I'll solicit them through, letters
Email them,
and whatnot.
ask them if they'd like you to come?
Yes.
I know,
Yep.
I've spoken at Rotary clubs. They're very kind, very, you can eat with them, and then
Right.
they have you speak for like 20 minutes.
Yep.
They're very congenial.
Yeah, no, I like the Rotaries. I actually, it's a two-way street with the Rotaries. I enjoy listening to the projects that they've got going.
Yeah.
It's really nice to hear that members of the community are really involved with some of the less fortunate.
Now, here comes the next question, big one. What's coming up next? Is there anything?
It's funny. That's been the most often asked question recently since the second book came out. I haven't thought of anything. I've had numerous suggestions, including a number of people that told me I should write a sequel on the first one, because on the first one you don't know what happens to the characters at the end.
Yeah.
So. And I have thought about that. Right now, one of the issues about being an independent author is that you wear a lot of different hats. And right now, I have my business hat on, and I'm doing a lot of marketing, a lot of promoting, a lot of appearances, and probably will continue until the spring. I've already got even some appearances scheduled for the spring.
Yeah.
I think it's when it takes some downtime around that time, I'll start considering a second novel.
Close
Third
to
novel.
here, so people could know ahead of time. Where are you going to be in the general area around here, or within good driving distance? Have you been to Tatnuck yet in Westboro?
I haven't.
Oh boy, you'd enjoy that.
Really?
Oh, it's right up like 8 minutes up the road.
Yeah.
They have a big, I've spoken there, big room in there. People will come on in, and they're very good at advertising. They're in the
Oh.
newspaper. They have like an easel. As soon as you walk in the store, you can see who's going to be speaking.
Oh.
Tatnuck. I'll talk to you about it after.
Yeah,
Your
absolutely.
connection.
I will. I'll reach out. I've been really busy for the fall, and I've been appearing a couple of times, 3 times, even 4 times a week. And I'm at that point where with the holidays where I'm going to take a little downtime after the first of the year.
Do you miss police work?
I enjoyed my 21 years. It's a tough job.
That's a long haul.
Yeah.
Boy, did you mind going from a photographer carrying a camera to carrying a gun?
Yeah.
That's huge to me.
There was a little bit of
Oh.
a settling in with it, especially the first time I went to the range and everyone shooting around me. I had never handled a gun before, and that was interesting.
So, all right. So you live in Rentham, and
Yes.
so that I know I did what do you call it, an arts and craft fair in your common a number of
Yes.
years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful. My mother was in the Maples.
Oh yeah,
She
Maples
was,
Nursing Home.
Yep,
Yeah.
she was in there, and they lived in Foxborough. So every time I'd go down to visit Mom and Dad, I don't like the highway.
Yeah.
So I'd go down to Milford, 140
140,
all
yeah.
the way
Yeah.
to Foxborough. It's a
Yeah.
long way, yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm more
It's a
comfortable.
pretty ride though.
I'm more comfortable. I think I've been to your library over there.
Yeah, the Fisk Library.
You've been there. Remember, it
I
was
have.
that little building it used to be, right? And it's
Yes,
moved?
it's now it's down off of Randall Road.
Yeah.
It's down by where the back entrance to the schools are.
I
Yeah.
remember very nice people over there too.
Yeah.
I know you've probably spoken there, right?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They can't pass you up. You
Yeah.
live right there. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Now let me know if you have another one coming up.
I will.
Let us know.
Absolutely.
So we'll
Yeah.
get you back on. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you next time and be my guest.
All right.